Our guest for this week is Susan Celentano, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist, and we are here to continue our e-awareness campaign on the issue of suicide prevention. Susan, thank you for being with us.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Let's talk briefly about your background. What is the focus of your practice?
I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I've been licensed for 25 years, but for the past 18 years I've been almost exclusively involved in suicide and suicide prevention. I work on with the Survivors After Suicide program, which is a program for people who have lost someone to suicide, and I also see individuals and families for suicide bereavement. I also have workshops and other activities groups that I do that are also focused on suicide and suicide bereavement.
What are the factors? Life has speed bumps. We all know that.
Yes.
What are the factors that lead a person into the belief that perhaps suicide is a reasonable alternative from their perspective?
Yes. Suicide is a complex phenomena, and I don't believe that a lot of people are aware of just how complex it is. So the seeds of suicidal thinking may have been in an individual since early childhood, and perhaps even before then in terms of the genetic predisposition. Certainly mental illness, major depression, clinical depression, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia all have a very strong genetic component. So someone may come into the world with a predisposition for mental illness, which then is a predisposition for suicidal thinking and possible behavior.
Is there, as suicides happen in life and are reported, it happens in the time frame we sit right now. Suicide is heavily in the news because of Robin Williams.
Right.
Does that have an impact in any direction on these issues?
The suicide of Robin Williams certainly has an impact in many respects, and the first one that comes to me is the media coverage. About 10% of suicides are a result of what they call a contagion effect, which is or copycat effect, which is a celebrity or someone famous kills themselves and then people will copy that behavior. So certainly the media coverage in the Robin Williams case does have an impact on the suicide rate in general. And then the other issue that comes up is that when someone such as Robin Williams ends their life, it does bring attention to these issues that we're talking about, depression and suicide, which carry great stigma in our society. People don't want to talk about these issues. They're considered taboo, and that prevents people who have these mental disorders from getting treatment and thus from preventing suicide.
So it sounds as if it could almost work both ways. It's an increased risk of a copycat effect,
yes,
but it also puts the issue on the table in a way that might allow a reduction in the stigma if handled properly.
Yes, exactly. And I know that the major suicide organizations did put out media alerts for the Robin Williams coverage so that we could reduce the copycat effect.
Is that more or less likely to increase a risk factor with the hereditary element of this? If you have somewhere in your family currently or even far in the past, is that somehow an increased risk factor from a copycat perspective, even if you didn't experience it in real time?
Yes, there is research being done on whether or not there is a gene, an actual what they're calling a suicide gene, but there hasn't been any conclusive evidence as of at this point in time that there does exist such a gene. But within families, of course, as I said, the mental illnesses are genetic, and there's also, say your parent killed him or herself, that does open up suicide as a viable option within families, and we do see repeat suicides within a family. And at this point in time, the primary explanation for that, or the prevailing explanation in the absence of a suicide gene, is that there is a copycat effect going on, or opening the door to suicide as a viable option.
What are, moving into the symptoms that might lead us to assist with prevention, what are the symptoms that we may see in a person approaching this consideration.
Okay. If we're looking at someone who is in an acute suicide crisis, as I said before, suicide is a complex phenomena that develops over a long, extended period of time and may have been on the back burner for this person for many, many years. But when that person enters the acute suicidal crisis, there's what we call cognitive constriction, commonly known as tunnel vision, which is really black and white thinking or a narrowing of the vision, so that other possibilities, alternatives, hope, all of those kinds of things, even the love of family members, friends, anything that attached the person to life leaves that tunnel, so that eventually the tunnel narrows all the way down to the only option that's left that's viable, which is suicide. So what you'd be looking for in someone, and also I wanted to say that depression is to be distinguished from sadness. It's not someone having a blue day or a down day, which we all have now and then. Depression is a very serious and very debilitating chemical disorder. It's not something where you can say to someone, oh, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, or let's go out to a party, you'll feel better. That's not the case with depression. Depression is, some people call it a black hole. It's really something that is very, very profound and very debilitating. It's not like being sad. So having said that, you're looking for someone who is in a depressive state. I'm going to use a mnemonic to talk about some of the signs or warning signs of suicide. And the mnemonic is path warm. And it's what we use to assess whether or not the lethality of someone who may be considering suicide. So starting with is. The I is for isolation. For ideation, for suicide ideation. The biggest risk factor for suicide is having made a prior attempt, by far, or repeated attempts. So you're looking at the person's ideation and their history of attempts. The S in is for substance abuse. Substance abuse is a huge factor in suicide. In fact, the two major mental illnesses that contribute to suicide or that are present in suicide are clinical depression and substance abuse disorders. And then moving to the word path. The P is for purposelessness. People who are suicidal or in a suicidal crisis are feeling disconnected. They're not feeling like they're involved or that their life has any worth. In fact, quite the opposite of that, they're feeling that they're a burden to their loved ones. Moving to the A is for anxiety. Anxiety is almost always present in suicidal crisis, anxiety and agitation. So even though the person may be depressed, there's still anxiety and agitation there. So that would be something that you're looking for. The T in path is for feeling trapped. People who are feeling suicidal are feeling that they have no other options, that they're backed into a corner. Okay, as I said, most suicides are the result of an extended period of time, but some suicides are impulsive, and they're the result of a loss, a relationship breakup, financial crisis. The person just doesn't have the tolerance, the ability to tolerate that distress, which could result in suicide. So there's that feeling of being trapped, no options. The H is for helplessness and hopelessness, almost always present in suicide. A sense that not only do I have no hope, but there's no ability for me to find hope. I'm helpless to be able to change my circumstances. And then the last word, warm, the W is for, what is the W for? I'm going to move to the A. The A is for anger. Anger is almost always present in suicide, a sense of anger and agitation, so that's something you'd be looking for as well, the anger, even rage in someone. And I want to emphasize that some of these behaviors are different from what they used to be. You're looking for a change in the person's behavior. Okay. The R, reckless behavior. It's very hard to go against our life instinct. Okay, we have a very strong instinct for life preservation. So reckless behavior allows us to lead up to the ability to do something self-destructive. So you're looking for reckless behavior as well. And I'm sorry, I'm going to go back to the W, which is withdrawal. And isolation, very, very important factor in suicide. Someone who is actually disengaging from life, withdrawing from friends and family, not attending activities, not going to work, just kind of pulling back from engagement with life. And then the last one is M, and that's for mood changes. Okay, and again, you're looking for dramatic, usually dramatic or significant changes in the mood of the person. Problems sleeping, problems with appetite, problems with energy level, problems with motivation. Again, debilitating kinds of things that prevent the person from actually functioning in life.
And so these are the primary factors and causes that I don't want to make it sound pared down to a checklist.
Yes.
But if observing a loved one going through a difficult time, if that is path warm, is almost used as a checklist, what of these factors are in here? That's something to watch for.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to just distinguish, those are warning signs. They're not necessarily the risk factors for suicide. Okay, they're factors that are usually present when the person has entered that acute suicidal crisis and they are experiencing that cognitive constriction where they gradually are only seeing suicide as a viable option.
So it actually seems to require even more diligence, not that we're looking for people who may be in trouble, but it requires more diligence because there are elements of this that seem very subtle. You need to be observing changes that may be happening over a longer period of time than yesterday the person wasn't reckless, today the person's reckless. It's not going to be that stark, is it?
No, it's not. It is going to be dramatic in some circumstances, though. The changes should be dramatic. Not just subtle changes in their everyday routines. It should really be dramatic, not as dramatic as maybe you just suggested, but they should be significant and dramatic changes.
Something you haven't mentioned yet, what of a person who is threatening suicide? And is there a distinction, and if so, how would we tell the distinction between a person who is threatening in a way to manipulate other people's behavior or a person who's threatening because it's a cry for help?
You just said a bad word for me, and that's why you threw me for a little bit, and that's the word manipulation. I don't believe that we should be looking at any suicidal threat as manipulation, and if it is a cry for help, then I think we need to respond to that cry. A suicidal threat is always to be taken seriously, even if the person has made attempts in the past. Always to be taken seriously, and letting the person know, if you are going to tell me that you are feeling like you're going to kill yourself, I am going to do something about that. I'm going to contact your husband, your wife. I am going to call an emergency psychiatric team to have you evaluated. I'm going to do these things. So that might diminish the person who is threatening without intent to really act on that threat. But you do want to take it seriously, and you do want to follow up on attempting to save and get that person the help that they need.
Now, you made a distinction a moment ago with a person taking seriously a person who threatens, even though they have tried it in the past, you should still consider this serious. What of someone who has not ever made an attempt?
Still the same.
Same.
Still the same. Even though, as I said earlier, the biggest risk factor for suicide is that you have had a prior attempt. Again, that goes back to the gradual kind of breaking down of our life, our instinct for life preservation. By engaging in suicide attempts, by engaging in reckless and self-destructive behaviors. So if someone says they had made a prior attempt, you want to take that very seriously, because that puts them at very high risk. But even if they hadn't had the prior attempt, it doesn't mean that people kill themselves and it's their only attempt. They hadn't made prior attempts. So we need to take both very seriously.
Now, let's move forward to the prevention.
Okay.
We have observed someone with the risk factor. Someone in our lives is showing some of these risk factors, some of these signs, many, only a couple. What should we do at that point?
Okay. The first thing that I would say is to ask them very clearly and directly, without using euphemisms, without beating around the bush, and just saying, Are you suicidal? Using the words and asking directly. Usually the person will tell you if they're suicidal. You want to take approach. You don't want to act shocked. If they say yes, you don't want to act shocked. You want to take a very non-judgmental approach with them. Allow them to express their feelings. Don't get into a discussion about the pros and cons of suicide. Don't get into a debate about that. The basic thing you want to do is allow them to talk about how they're feeling, remembering that people who are in that tunnel vision are feeling disconnected. So you want to connect them. You want to reconnect them with life, and that's your goal. If you say, are you feeling suicidal, and they say yes, your primary goal at that point is to get them reconnected by listening actively, listening non-judgmentally, and then connecting them with the resources in their life that will further engage them in life. Coming up with a safety plan. As a lay person, you wouldn't want to necessarily ask someone if they have a plan as to what they're going to do. That's really a professional's job. But in the absence of a professional, you may want to ask that question. Have you thought about what you would do? And that gives you an idea of how serious the person is, and how, what kind of treatment or what kind of safety plan you're going to work on. Certainly if they have the means and they have a time and a day in mind, you need to help that person get hospitalized. If it's a very vague ideation where they don't have any means and they don't really have a plan, then you might work on a safety plan where you're mobilizing their resources and, again, getting them reconnected to life.
Yeah. There seem to be two time frames, narrowing it down far too much, two time frames in approaching a person in this condition. There's the imminent danger, and there's this may be spiraling down a dangerous path. As to the timing, it seems clear, and I'm cheating. I've read the material we've put together so far, but someone's seeing this for the first time. It's an emergency. Something's potentially about to happen right now. What do I do to help this person?
If you call 911. If the person has a therapist, or you would have already called that person and tried to engage that person. But if it's an emergency, as you're suggesting now, where you feel someone is in imminent danger of killing themselves, you call 911, or take them to the nearest emergency room.
What of a suicide hotline?
Yes.
For example, what we know the D.D. Hirsch organization has on their website.
Absolutely. Yeah.
At what point? Who uses that? The loved one or the person in trouble?
Probably both.
Okay.
Both use that. But they would use that prior to the situation that you're describing. If you're talking about imminent risk, this could happen now, this could happen within the hour, then you're getting emergency treatment, like you would for a medical condition that's emergent. Okay? If it's not emergent, like I said, if it's vague ideation, I'm feeling like I don't want to live anymore. I don't have a plan, but the thought is entering my mind more and more. At that point, it might be valuable to call the hotline. Okay, at that point, the constriction has not gotten too narrow. The person is still amenable to considering possibilities and other options. Once the constriction gets so narrow, then you need the probable hospitalization.
What can I do if I'm dealing with a person who, perhaps because of stigma, perhaps sometimes I hear it's generational, I don't know whether it is or not. My generation doesn't seek professional help. We don't do that sort of thing. How do you assist a person who is resisting seeking a professional? If I injure my knee, I'm going to go to the doctor. If my soul is hurt, why am I not going to see that doctor?
Sure.
How do I get through those objections with a person?
Listen to what they're saying. And even if you remember nothing from this talk today, what you want to remember is to listen to people, to look at them, to make eye contact. You talked about the soul. You want to connect soul to soul. Edwin Schneidman was one of the founders of the current suicide movement with survivors and prevention. And he used to say, when he was working with a suicidal person, he would say, "Where do you hurt, and how can I help?" And I just love that. And I think it's the simplest but yet most profound way of helping someone who's considering suicide. Where do you hurt, and how can I help? So you're engaged, you're allowing the person to express openly their feelings. You're showing them that you care. You're helping them to engage and reconnect with another human being. Then you've got something to work with. You've reestablished that connection with another human being. So don't worry so much about the clinical interventions that might be out there. Think more about a human interaction, okay, where you're connecting with someone and re-engaging them in life, letting them know you care where they hurt, and how can you help them.
And if you are not a professional, from there, having made that connection, then you are guiding them to the resources.
To a safety plan, yes. To developing a safety plan with their therapist, which if they don't have one, helping them get one, to family members who are supportive, to friends who are supportive, possibly medication, a whole plan that they and their mental health professional will put together to keep that person safe.
So in sending our club members and our other viewers of this program out into the world in their lives, I want to let you summarize, but I want to be sure in a sense that I'm also clear representing the non-pros in our club. We as individuals are looking for the signs in the is path warm area.
Yes.
And just about the only real judgment we have to make seems to be, is it imminent, where the plan is 911? Or is it planning?
Yes.
Coming up with a safety plan?
Yes.
How would you summarize where we should go from here?
From the
perspective of now we're going out in the world, and if we encounter a loved one who is in this condition, having recognized it from the warning signs we're learning about today, what's our path?
Direct communication. I think that that's what you're getting at, is that what do you say, how do you deal with this person in the absence of an imminent emergency. If you notice some of these signs, withdrawing from life, changes in habits, increased substance abuse, a sense of purposelessness, or feeling like a burden, all of the things that we talked about, asking the person directly, I've noticed that you're a little bit different lately. You seem a little down. Are you depressed or feeling suicidal? Asking directly. Practice saying that. And if you feel that you might come across someone who's suicidal, or with your friend, just say, are you feeling suicidal? It's hard for people to say the word. And maybe having just that practice will help when you're in that situation to be able to say the word. People need to, again, it's going back to that sense of connection, and how suicide is all about isolation and disconnection and feeling like a burden. So you're trying to connect again on a human level, and you're trying to engage with that part of the person that wants to stay alive. There's always ambivalence in suicide, so you want to find that part of the person that wants to live and engage with that part. And again, all of this isn't on the lay person. You are a conduit to hooking the person up with a professional person, but there is a lot that the lay person can do. And if the lay person is educated and knows how to ask that question directly, which will then lead, hopefully, to a productive discussion about how to keep the person alive. Are you feeling suicidal? Where do you hurt, and how can I help?
Susan Celentano, thank you for your expertise, and thank you for teaching us some very practical things that we can use to save lives. So thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Mel.